Hey guys, welcome to another episode on ForgottenLanguages.com. I'm your host, Dr. Jackson Crawford, and today we're talking about something that's a little bit in my wheelhouse and a little bit not, which is, of course, Old Elbonian and its script. I have referred many a time on this channel to the huge mystery that underlies the change from the efficient 24-letter Elder Futhark runic alphabet to the boneheadedly inefficient, and I say that while, liking it and using it all the time, Younger Futhark. And as new discoveries have come to light, the influence of Old Elbonian script on the way that Younger Futhark is written has become, I think, almost indisputable. And a recent discovery that we're going to talk about here has actually allowed us access to a much more cohesive, coherent text of Old Elbonian than we've previously had. So I'm going to show you a reproduction of that and talk about what the text says and kind of get into some of the characteristics of this as a language, its phonology, its morphology, and especially its deficient script. Now, the Hobeheelville stone has been fairly well characterized in the media as a revolution in Old Elbonian studies, but there's a lot of misunderstandings that have arisen about it too. One is that it's a stone. As you can see, it's really made of baked mud. Right? Clay would be a generous term. Old Elbonian is actually traditionally not written in stone, as the Elbonians apparently didn't have the ability to carve rock. Right? So this is in fact pretty imperishable by the standards of Old Elbonian script. This was also found fragmented. I was there during the find itself, the excavation. That was a pure coincidence. I happened to be down there with some colleagues from the University of Uppsala. We were filming some material about runestones in the area, and I just happened to be dropping in on that excavation as this was brought to light. Unfortunately, this does appear to be the only example of Old Elbonian script from the site, and it is a nightmare. As I'm going to describe, this thing is rough reading. I mean, as you can see, the letters are minimal. Many of them are, in fact, mirror images of one another, which doesn't help you very much when the direction of writing can flip from left to right or right to left. And in fact, on this very sample itself, it is the second line from the top that is the first one to be read, and it is the last line at the top that is the last to be read. The inscriber actually was running out of space and just continued the text from the bottom at the top. The only reason this particular text is actually more intelligible to us than our typical Old Elbonian remains is that we have a modern Elbonian reworking of the same myth. Now, in that modern Elbonian story, which Elbonians are surely familiar with, it is actually a hero of the conversion of Elbonia who is given the heroic status that the traditional pagan Hobeheelville is given in the Old Elbonian myth. Elbonia, by the way, does have the interesting distinction of being the only country converted directly from paganism to Calvinism, as they did find Catholicism too cheerful. Now, it's fortuitous that I happened to be present at the excavation, as this fragmented tablet was very difficult to piece together, even with the pieces being more or less in situ, again, because you have the problem that it can be really hard to tell which direction to read a line in, and even if you're looking at the top or the bottom of an inscription. So let's talk about some of the reasons why this alphabet is so difficult. And I'm going to have to turn to my own notes about this. It's a very complex subject. As to my background in Old Elbonian, of course, as everyone knows, I'm an Old Norse specialist. I deal mostly with Germanic languages, Old Norse, Gothic, Old English, etc. But I also have a deep background in Indo-European studies. And during my master's in Indo-European studies at the University of Georgia, we actually had a small unit on Old Elbonian in our ancient scripts class. So I have a little bit more exposure to it than other people, but I mean, it's not Indo-European. So it's not like I have any leg up in terms of interpreting the text. Anyone who's tried to study even modern Elbonian knows that this is not a language for beginners, right? This is a language that challenges you at every step. But even modern Elbonian doesn't have some of the challenges of Old Elbonian. So one of the critical things to keep in mind about Old Elbonian is there are all of these really fine distinctions between very similar sounds. So, for example, there is a voiceless H, something like the H in English, hard, and then there is a voiced H, right? Your vocal cords are vibrating as you articulate this fricative in your throat. It's a little bit difficult for me to imitate. Of course, I don't natively speak any languages that make this distinction, but something like hard versus hard, it's really, really tough to make. In some dialects of English, people will actually make that voiced H between vowels. So some speakers will actually make that voiced H in a word like ahead, but nobody hears it as any different from a normal H in English because it doesn't make any phonemic distinctions. In Old Elbonian, it makes some critical distinctions because, for example, the so-called construct state of the noun is made by voicing the first consonant in the onset of the noun. Okay? So if your noun starts with that voiceless H, you have to articulate it as the voiced H instead to put it into the construct state. Now, the construct state is what you use if that noun is possessed, right? There is a possessor. This is not like a language like English or modern Scandinavian languages where you mark the possessor. It's a language where you mark the possessed thing. So, for example, in the name of the hero, Hovahiavel, that first H is voiced because, in fact, his name, often rendered as Rabbit Wrath, is Rabbit's Wrath, but it's the wrath part that is marked as possessed by rabbit, not the rabbit that has that extra possessive S that we have in English, if you see what I'm saying. So that's a quite different system from anything familiar in you know, your typical sort of European language classes, right? You can find something kind of similar in some American Indian languages and in other languages around the globe. But that voiced distinction, which is so fine and so difficult to make, is not rendered in writing. So you actually cannot tell the absolutive cases of a noun from the construct cases of a noun just by looking at them in writing. You have to infer from context whether the noun is in a possessed state or if it's just a typical noun, right? So there's a different word for buffalo, weasant, right, if we're going to use the European term to translate this, which of course makes sense given local conditions. So that's pierg, piergil in the nominative, say, okay? But piergil is the absolutive nominative, right? That's weasant. But to talk about, you know, say I have a weasant for some reason, right? I'm raising one on a ranch. That's then my weasant. I don't put the word my there. I modify the word weasant, and it becomes biergil, if you see what I'm saying. But that distinction is not reflected in writing. Likewise, the plural of the noun is made by fricativizing the onset consonant so that pierg, buffalo, has a plural pierg. I may be forgetting an umlaut there. But the distinction between a fricative and a stop consonant made in the same part of your mouth, not reflected in writing. So in fact, we have a distinction between absolutive, right? So there is a buffalo, construct singular, that's my buffalo, plural absolutive, there's some buffalo, and a plural construct, those are my buffalo. And while the spoken language makes very fine distinctions between these, as it does a little bit more clearly in modern Elbonian, the written language makes no distinction between those consonants. Now, an additional problem is that nouns are inflected in multiple cases, right? The so-called instrumental, which is really a pretty poor term, but we use it for historical reasons because it's an instrumental in related languages, and an accusative case. And in some vestigial East Old Elbonian dialects, we also see a vocative. And unfortunately, most of the changes in a word from case to case are vowel harmony effects, they're umlaut effects, they're these fricativization or voicing effects, and none of that is reflected in writing. This makes it kind of a nightmare because the language as spoken relies on these fine distinctions to communicate who's doing what and does not rely on word order. So when we're looking at the script, if we're not native speakers who know what to expect, who's subject, who's object, we may actually miss who the subject and the object are. Even worse, if we're treating this language as a little bit of a difficult point, and I think that we fairly can, there is, I guess you could say, kind of a vowel harmony rule where O, the vowel long O, we'll get back to this distinction in a moment, long O in a noun or verb group is strongly associated with negative valence. Okay, so the word bad in Old Elbonian, for example, is hone. All right, but then we have the vowel, or really falling diphthong sequence, ie, which is associated with good valence. So hone, bad, hien, good, that distinction is not expressed in writing because Old Elbonian script does not reflect the different qualities of vowels and diphthongs that are present in Old Elbonian. Instead, what the script communicates to us is simply, is this vowel stressed or not, which we already know because the first syllable of any word is stressed, and is the vowel nasal or not, which we don't really need either because typically nasal consonants are written following that nasal vowel. Not always. So sometimes the vowel letter used can give us some extra little hint about what particular word we should be reading there, but it's often very, 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 very difficult. So let's talk about, oh, and let me not forget to mention the difficulty with the long vowels in phonology. Old Elbonian has a relatively restricted phonological set. Vowel inventory is not huge. And a lot of distinctions are made by length. So for example, the vowel e might be long. It might be short, long, or overlong. It might be roughly. Estonian has a similar distinction. But only has the full set of 3. For the other vowels and diphthongs, for historical reasons, the set is reduced to only 1 or only 2 of the set. And sometimes it's a different set in the stressed versus the unstressed vowels. Again, critical distinctions made by these different vowels, none of them expressed in writing. And then when we look at the consonant system, in addition to all consonants that are made at the same point of articulation in your mouth being written with the same character, right? So we use the same letter for T and N. We use the same letter for P and B and M and F. We use the same character for K and G. We use the same character for S and Z. It's a miracle they actually distinguish that sibilant. And they use the same character for all of R, L, and dark L. In addition to that, the H's that I discussed previously are historically T's, right? They probably went through a interdental fricative stage, like a the stage. And so H is written as if it's T. And so when we transcribe a text like Old Elbonian, I'll show this to you on the screen, you are seeing something that has almost no relation to how a specialist who knows how to read this is going to read it out, because these are, in effect, dartboards that have a dart that tells us, like, this is in the 20 ring, right? But there's a whole lot of words potentially in that 20 ring. Let's consider, in this very reading, which is the Honahiavel myth, right? The myth of Wrath Rabbit, the great hero. Let's consider how some of these words are actually spelled in this text. And I'll give you a reading of the text. This is a little bit reconstructed, obviously, because again, we can never be 100% sure ever what we're really reading in Old Elbonian. But with the help of the modern Elbonian story, we can reasonably surely guess the flow of the story, because it's still fairly similar to modern Elbonian. So I'll give you that reading here after a quick message from my friends and partners at Grimfrost, and then I'll also discuss some of the implications of the script and phonology problems that we're running up to in actually trying to read something. Hey folks, we'll be back to your regular presentation in a moment, but right now I'm here at Grimfrost World Headquarters Longhouse with Johan Hegg, and I just want to remind you that if you have Viking needs, you have a Viking supplier. Grimfrost really cares about getting things right, and if you need replica, well, anything, right? Shields, helmets, weapons, board games,
cool t-shirts, hats, all sorts of accessories like that. You can get them at grimfrost.com together with my books, and they ship just about anywhere in the world. So check them out. It does help support the channel.
Now, I am going to read to you the Old Elbonian version, at least as much as we have on this tablet, the Honahiavel tablet, of the story of the first Wiesent hunt, in which the hero Honahiavel hunts the great Wiesent at the dawn of time and is aided / kind of not aided by the sun god Hsiahiavel. You may note that their names appear similar, but there are different V's in the last syllable of those two names, and some other differences, including the S in the sun god's name. Obviously, it is something of a problem that the name of the hero and the name of the god are the same in writing. But here is, as best as I can reconstruct this, and again, I'm not an Old Elbonian specialist. I have a decent reading knowledge of modern Elbonian. I've certainly visited Elbonian and done some study, but please, understand I'm not going to bring a native accent to this. So, all right. Heniaket henoket, zeliagil, piergil polkil, hesmond, hovehiavel heihail, zeliu, honbei hiename temme, hasiahiovel, hutumnel, hesianak, hesieste heieste, waulkil, tien asem, tiem hinsem, hiename, hasiahiovel, hovehiavel, hienel. And then the text is lost. All right, what do we have here? Well, we have, let's consider our corpus for a moment. This is a revolutionarily literary inscription in the context of our other Old Elbonian finds, right? Most of what we find are transaction records, effectively receipts, occasionally memorials. Of course, there's the unfortunate habit of fathers giving their sons names that are spelled the exact same way as their own, so it's often difficult to tell who the honorer and the honoree are, respectively. This having actual literary content, we're a little spoiled here, right? This is the Ruk runestone of Old Elbonian studies. And it appears to be, again, from a pretty small corpus, that a special desideratum of Old Elbonian poetry is not only the templatic design of lines, where we want roots that begin and end with maximally similar sounding consonants, which you're probably already anticipating the problem here, but in fact, with roots plus endings that will be spelled the same across an entire line, or almost an entire line. Now, one of the lines that I read there, some of you may recognize it still on the crest of Elbonia. Honbei hiename temme. All three of those words in that motto, one of the most secure samples of Old Elbonian, it means, with the worst we have, we do the best we can. Roughly, of course, the grammar is quite different. It's translated in English with 11 words. It's 3 words in Old Elbonian. I'll get back to some of that grammar. All three of those words are written the same, right? What we would actually transliterate as T, stressed nasal vowel, B, unstressed vowel, right? That's all the information that the writing system is going to give us, and it applies equally to all three of those words, right? All the H's are written the same, and they're written the same as the T. All stressed vowels, when followed by a nasal, are written the same. All these stressed vowels are followed by a nasal. We also then don't often write the nasal before the following consonant, applicable to all of these. They all have a nasal followed by another consonant. And then no matter how many unstressed vowels you have, or what they are, or if there's 3 of them and they're all different, you write the unstressed vowel mark once. And if one word ends in a sound written with the same letter as the next word begins with, we only write it once. And since there are no word divisions, it can sometimes be quite difficult to tell whether we're looking at something that belongs to 1 word or 2 words, or if it belongs to one, then to which. Another issue here, of course, is while we can kind of sometimes guess where the beginning of one word is based on the fact that it has a stressed vowel, many vowels that are unstressed in Old Elbonian but were stressed in Proto-Elbonian are written as if they're stressed. So we have a heck of a time with this. So let me explain with sort of broad strokes what we're looking at in the actual text here. So we've got the past tense marker. Well, the language is more complex than that, right? Really, it's a perfect tense marker. Is H, voiceless H. So we see that on these verbs. Heniaked, Hanoket. It was early, it was late. This is another thing that Elbonians love to do. And there you actually kind of see that the duality, Ie, is good, sort of, in valence, right? It's early. And O is bad in valence. It's late. So Heniaked, Hanoket. But of course, this word's written the same. So it was early, it was late. What was it late in? It was late zeliegu. So that's the instrumental form of in the life. That is also the construct instrumental form of in the life, right? This is the life of the Wiesent, as we're going to see in the next line, which contains Piergil. So there we have the Wiesent itself. There's no special marking for the possessor, right? There's no genitive case. It's just you figure it out from context what's possessing what from what words are around it. Pole Q. We actually have two different L's there. It's a little bit difficult to distinguish for us. And of course, that O is extra long. That is the instrumental of in the mud. And then Hesmod was mired. So it was early in time, right? But it was late in the life of the Wiesent. The Wiesent is mired in the mud. Hovehievel, that's rabbit wrath. Wrath of the rabbit. That's our hero. Misplaced, Zeligeu, his spear. Hey, how. And the only way we know it's his spear is that it's got that construct marker, right? It's voiced. But of course, we can only infer that from the modern Elbonian text. There's no distinction in writing between the absolutive and the construct state in Old Elbonian. So our hero misplaced a spear. Notice that misplaced in the preterite, that's a stem verb, so it's got a different preterite mark of the Z. That's going to wind up looking exactly like that in the life word from 2 lines above it, so that's quite difficult. Then we've got that motto, Honda yei hiname temme. So we've got bad, hon, plus an instrumental suffix, so with the bad, plus a superlative suffix, so with the worst, plus a relative suffix, so with the worst, relative, none of that is expressed in writing. Hiename, so hien is good. I have to remind myself of this. And then is the accusative marker in most adjectives. And then we have that superlative marker again, that A. So the best in the accusative, and then teme, we do. And aorist, that's not actually a present tense, we just read it as a present tense. Then Siahiavel Hatiumnel Hesianak, so the sun, Hasiahiavel, shown Hesianak by means of a ray, Hatiumnel. And then he says there's never a marker for what someone says, we just have to infer from context that someone is speaking. Zieste, Heiste, we have these sequences of like 3 vowels, which are not reflected in writing. Wolq, so make, that's either the command form, the imperative, or the perfect past tense form of make. A spear in the accusative, heiste, there's those 3 vowels in sequence. From mud, Wolq. If you believe in me, Tien Asum. So there we have the verb root, Tien, that ach infix there is actually the if part of this, right? That's the conditional. Then we have the suffix, the subject expressed as that suffix s, and the object expressed as that suffix m. Tiem hinsem. Notice these 2 words are written the same as each other. Then resultative, right? Give is tiem, and then that ins is the resultative. So like then, thus, for me, make it or give it he and may, the best. There's that same word from 2 lines or 3 lines above. So if you believe in me, give me the best spear by implication. And then Hasia hiavel, hoba hiavel, hia now. So the sun charged, right, made good, something like that. Without seeing the rest of this, we're never going to know what the next words are, what context the he and l in, but does something to hoba hiavel, and we know that he's the object because the L is a dark L, but we don't know that from the Old Elbonian script. We only know that from inference from the modern Elbonian form of this tale. So, what's the long shot here? The long shot is we have an urgent need for more Old Elbonian literature. Hopefully, some of it will be found on less perishable surfaces than this mud, or you know, the rice paper like sheepskins that they would occasionally use to write on, which never survived for 1500 years. And I think as we get to know this writing system a little bit better, as we're able to penetrate into these stories a little bit more, I think we're going to find a little bit more evidence for contact between Old Elbonian speakers and early Old Norse speakers at right about the same time as that tablet is dated to, right around the 600s AD, when we know that Old Elbonian speakers and early Old Norse speakers are interacting in the same places. And that's right before the Elder Futhark alphabet is replaced with this maniacally inefficient alphabet. It's not quite this bad, but it's bad. And of course, no one's ever been able to find out what the cause of this is. But of course, if for some reason Old Elbonian trade items are in demand, perhaps Old Elbonian mercenaries fulfill important roles. I mean, I say mercenaries, mercenaries, people for hire, fulfill important roles in Scandinavian society at this time. We don't know what the influence is, but maybe someone learns this awful alphabet and says, actually, I can disguise my messages a little bit better, right? Because I'll know what to read back from that. Maybe that's the idea. And thankfully, they don't go full Elbonian with it, because you never want to go full Elbonian with your script. Well, there's a lot more I could say. I'm going to post some more material, including a reference grammar of what I've been able to deduce about Old Elbonian, especially with the help of this tablet and with the bilingual tablet of Queen Wiesentwit. But for now, I think that's probably about as much Old Elbonian as you'll ever find anywhere. And from beautiful Arizona, I hope that you all know that I'm thanking you for your support on Patreon and in the Zoom classes and by buying my books. And I'm wishing you all the best. No notes. I actually did that without notes.
Impressive.
Do you want to move anything?
Do you want me to swap the revolver to a high point?
Oh, shit. Awesome, yeah.
This is the perfect time to do it.
Yeah. Come back from the reading.
Oh.
Yeah, I should look maximally the same.
Yes. Where is... There
I think it's over there. That makes me truly indie, right? And now I'm in Professor Indie mode.
There we go.
Okay. Are you comfortable where you're at?
Yeah, I'll be on this side this time. Yeah, we're good.
Man, am I going to do this with one take? I hope so.